Chapter 509. Go to watch net. They all looked surprised. Go to watch net. But soon, they came to their senses. There was a cold and sarcastic smile on Zhuang Yiting's face, which made their hearts skip a beat. They thought to themselves, no, what's wrong with Sherboy Zhuang Yiting? When the little fox's eyes met Zhuang Yiting's, they immediately screamed in their hearts, no, this is not Sherboy Zhuang Yiting. Zhuang Yiting's eyes were full of hatred, as if she wanted to cut everyone in the Fox Zen school into pieces. The little foxes looked at Zhuang Yiting in horror. They had vaguely guessed what was going on, but no one dared to say it out loud. At this time, the cultivators of the various sects upstairs had no idea what had happened in the Fox Zen school. Some of them didn't know Zhuang Yiting, so they frowned and scolded, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Some cultivators who had gone to Mount Tianlong to participate in the siege of the Fox Zen school recognized Zhuang Yiting at a glance. They shouted at Li Yundong, "Zhenrenli, how do you discipline your subordinates?" Li Yundong looked at Zhuang Yiting with a cold face and said in a cold voice, "She is not my subordinate, nor is she a member of the Fox Zen school." The people who had spoken were stunned and didn't understand what Li Yundong meant. Wan Zhenyuan frowned and said to Zhuang Yiting, "You should be Zhenren Zhuang of the Fox Zen school, right? Today, for the sake of Zhenrenli, I won't argue with you. Please sit down on the sidelines." Zhuang Yiting laughed and said, "Wan Zhenyuan, what right do you have to yell at me? I beat you up on Mount Gazao and you couldn't even raise your head. Have you forgotten?" Wan Zhenyuan's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly opened his eyes wide and said in surprise, "You are Yan Fang?" When the crowd heard this, there was an uproar. Yan Fang? Yan Fang of the Linggong sect? It can't be. There were also some young cultivators who didn't know Yan Fang's reputation. They quickly asked, "Who is Yan Fang? Is she very powerful?" Immediately, an old and experienced cultivator said, "Hey, boy, listen carefully. Yan Fang was a famous female cultivator in the past. Before Yan Fang disappeared, she had always been known as the #1 master among female cultivators and also the #1 beauty. It wasn't until she suddenly disappeared one day that the title of the #1 female cultivator in the world slowly fell to Ziyuan. Then why did Yan Fang suddenly disappear? Hey, Yan Fang is so arrogant that she doesn't like any man in the world. She only has a crush on her Xixiang Wang Yuanshan, but her Xixiang Wang Yuanshan fell in love with Ao Wushuang of the Fox Zen school in the end. As a result, in a fit of anger, Yan Fang exposed their relationship to Celestial Master Zhang, the head of the Zhengyi school, and forced Wang Yuanshan to leave Ao Wushuang with the powerful power of the sect. Yan Fang originally thought that she could save her love this way, but the result was exactly the opposite. Wang Yuanshan would rather choose immortalization than her. Yan Fang is so powerful and is known as the #1 beauty. Why didn't Wang Yuanshan choose her? Why did he choose a vixen? TSK, kid, you don't understand. Look at those vixens next to her. Which one of them isn't a stunner? TSK, if a man can have a companion, he will be as happy as a god. The feeling is really indescribable. Martial uncle, the way you speak is so lewd. Ahem, cut the crap. Yan Fang saw that Wang Yuanshan refused to turn back, so she thought that it was all because the vixen of the Fox Zen school had used a hypnosis method to charm her Xixiang and steal her marriage. Therefore, Yan Fang sneaked into the Fox Zen school in anger and hid for 9 years. A while ago, she suddenly appeared on Mount Tianlong. I see. It turns out that it was this Yan Fang. Was she the one who planned the siege of Mount Tianlong last time? Yes. She is worth teaching. If it weren't for Li Yundong, I'm afraid that the Fox Zen school would have been destroyed at that time. This Yan Fang is so vicious. In order to take revenge, she hid for 9 years and wanted to destroy the whole school. Haven't you heard of the saying that a woman's heart is the most vicious? Hey, this is the internal strife of the Fox Zen school. Let's watch the show. Well, watch the show. For a moment, everyone was talking about it. Those who knew Yan Fang greeted her loudly, but Yan Fang acted as if she didn't hear them. She just stared at Li Yundong. Zhang Ling, who had fought fiercely with Yan Fang on Mount Gazao last time, also had a strange light in her eyes. She looked at the woman in front of her, who was determined to destroy the Fox Zen school, in surprise and doubt. Zhou Ping whispered to Zhang Ling, "Master, there is internal strife in the Fox Zen school. Yan Fang is a member of our Zhengyi school. Should we intervene later?" Zhang Ling shouted in a low voice, "Shut up. Yan Fang is a scheming woman. Since she dares to show up now, it means that she already has a backup plan and a perfect plan. Right now, it's best for us to wait and see." Li Yundong looked at Zhuang Yiting in shock and said, "So you are Yan Fang?" Yan Fang laughed and said, "That's right." Li Yundong, you didn't expect this, did you?" Li Yundong said in a cold voice, "What about Chao Yi? What did you do to her?" Yan Fang snorted coldly and said, "You'd better take care of yourself first." Du Fei of the Chuanzhen Dragon sect was very clear about the hatred between Yan Fang and the Fox Zen school. He stood up and said to Yan Fang, "Jinren Yan, as the saying goes, it's better to get rid of enmity than to keep it alive. The grudges between you and the Fox Zen school have accumulated to this day, and both sides have suffered heavy losses. The Linggong sect is now in a state of decline, and Jinren Zi Yuan can't support it alone. The Fox Zen school has been forced to leave their hometown, and countless people have died or been injured. Isn't it enough for you to take revenge to this extent? Why don't you stop?" Yan Fang suddenly turned her head and glared at Du Fei. She scolded him sternly, "Du Fei, what did you get from Li Yundong? Why are you speaking up for him like this?" Du Fei said unhappily, "Jinren Yan, I think you are blinded by a leaf and cannot see Mount Tai. Your eyes have been completely blinded by hatred. Jinren Li is open and aboveboard, selfless, generous, and elegant. I have never seen such a person in my life. And you, Jinren Yan, are also one of the weirdos in our cultivation world. I just want to preserve a little more vitality for our cultivation world, so I said something fair. What you said is an insult to me." Yan Fang stared at Du Fei coldly. She suddenly laughed and said, "You idiot, you've been deceived by him and you still don't know it. Besides, do you really think that I just want revenge? You underestimate me." Du Fei frowned and said, "Then why are you doing this, Jinren Yan?" Yan Fang suddenly pointed at Li Yundong and said loudly, "Fellow Taoists, today I'll let you know the true face of Li Yundong." When Zhou Qin saw Yan Fang pointing at Li Yundong and scolding him loudly, she was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She gritted her teeth, and her eyes were full of anger and hatred. In her opinion, anyone who offended Li Yundong was her enemy. She secretly vowed in her heart that she would make Yan Fang pay the price. Su Chan and the little foxes were also shocked and angry. They didn't know what kind of conspiracy Yan Fang had this time, nor did they know what kind of price they would have to pay this time. Li Yundong looked at Yan Fang coldly and said in a deep voice, "Yan Fang, if you have something to say, just say it. I'd like to see what you're up to this time." Yan Fang sneered and said, "It's hard to say who's up to this." After that, she said to the people present, "Fellow Taoists, I admit that I, Yan Fang, sneaked into the Fox Zen school 9 years ago and really wanted to take revenge. I wanted to destroy the Fox Zen school because of personal grievances." Hearing this, everyone was silent and sighed inwardly. It was precisely because of this hatred that the two sects had withered and were almost in danger of being destroyed. Seeing that everyone was listening to her, Yan Fang continued, "But when I sneaked into the Fox Zen school for the 3rd year, I suddenly found the secret treasure location of the Fox Zen School in Mount Tianlong. Once, I accidentally sneaked in and found the heavenly Jindan technique engraved on the rock wall by the mystical silver fox. Everyone was suddenly amazed. Zhou Ping and Zhang Ling looked at each other, and Zhou Ping immediately asked loudly, "Shu Yan Fang, have you memorized the heavenly Jindan technique?" Yan Fang glanced at her quickly, and there was a hint of sarcasm in her eyes. She simply said, "No." Zhou Ping was a little annoyed by Yan Fang's gaze. She shouted, "How is that possible? A cultivator like you can recite it backwards even if you read it once. Even if you didn't write it down at that time, you could write it down after you go back. How could you not remember it?" Yan Fang sneered and said, "Fellow Taoists, if the heavenly Jindan technique was placed in front of you, would you practice it?" The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other and didn't speak. As cultivators, if they saw the heavenly Jindan technique in front of them, it was absolutely impossible for them not to practice it. There was no cultivator in the world who could control such a desire. Seeing that everyone was silent, Yan Fang sneered and said, "By the way, when we cultivators see such a superior cultivation method, we will definitely find a way to practice it. But once I practice the heavenly Jindan technique, with the ability of that old fox, Lu Yi, how could he not notice it? Therefore, I didn't look at it at all. I only read a few words and then stopped." Hearing this, everyone was suddenly moved. They looked at Yan Fang in shock and thought to themselves, under the temptation of the heavenly Jindan technique, Yan Fang can even resist the temptation. It can be seen how strong her will is and how firm her will to take revenge is. Terrible, it's really terrible. Whoever has such an opponent will really have trouble sleeping and eating. At this time, Du Fei said, "Zhenren Yan, you said that you found a secret cave in the Fox Zen School and the heavenly Jindan technique, but what does this have to do with Zhenren Li? What does it have to do with the Fox Zen School? Everyone knows that the mystical silver fox was invincible in the world at that time. Moreover, she happened to live in the period of Mr. Chen Pu, the author of the heavenly Jindan technique. Is it strange that she wanted to get the heavenly Jindan technique and engrave it on the stone wall of the sect?" Yan Fang glanced at him and said with a sneer, "Zhenren Du is really protecting Li Yundong everywhere. Hey! Well, when I saw the heavenly Jindan technique, I was so shocked that I immediately refrained from reading it. But I saw that the last two sentences were written by the mystical silver fox on the stone wall. Everyone was curious and hurriedly asked, 'What is it? Tell me quickly.' Yan Fang said loudly, 'The first sentence is, in the 15th year of Tang Shizong, Mr. Naiwen Chen Pu created the heavenly Jindan technique. This technique seizes the creation of heaven and earth and is an extraordinary secret treasure for cultivation. I yearn for it, but I can't get it. However, I spent all my effort traveling to the divine land. It took me more than 10 years to record it here in the 3rd year of later Liang Qianhua.' When everyone heard this, they secretly clicked their tongues in wonder. Some people whispered, 'It said that there are a few great devils in the history of the cultivation world. The mystical silver fox is one of them. I didn't expect that the lost heavenly Jindan technique would be preserved by her. She is an anomaly, really an anomaly.' Li Yundong also nodded slightly. He said to Yan Fang in a deep voice, 'There is indeed such a sentence, but so what? Does it mean anything?' Yan Fang sneered and said, 'I haven't finished yet. There's another sentence.' Li Yundong frowned and asked, 'What else?' 'I didn't see the following sentence at that time.' Yan Fang sneered and said, 'Are you blind? There's another sentence below.' Everyone said loudly, 'Zhenren Yan, tell us quickly. What's the other sentence?' Yan Fang sneered and said loudly, 'This sentence is, although I have practiced the heavenly Jindan technique to the 9th level, I have committed a divine retribution because of it. I think I will have to go through the retribution in a few days.' If I fail, my soul will be scattered. Therefore, I left the heavenly Jindan technique here. I hope that in the future, the successor of our Fox Zen school can succeed and save my scattered soul from heaven and earth, so that I can reappear in the world. This sentence was tantamount to detonating an atomic bomb on the field. Everyone was so shocked that their faces changed greatly. Everyone stood up suddenly, and the scene suddenly became like a pot of boiling porridge. What? The mystical silver fox wants to reappear in the world? Is there such a conspiracy in the Fox Zen school? Zhenrenli, make it clear. Is there such a thing? Even though Li Yundong was very calm, he was still shocked to the spot, but he quickly retorted angrily, "It's impossible. There's no such sentence below. If you don't believe me, come back to Mount Tianlong with me now." Yan Fang sneered and said, "Didn't you see it? I think you're pretending not to see it. Li Yundong, don't quibble. You're Lu Ye's accomplice. He's dead. Now it's your turn to inherit his will. You just want to resurrect the mystical silver fox, don't you?" As she spoke, she didn't wait for Li Yundong to catch his breath and said sternly, "Since ancient times, when the nine-tailed celestial fox has descended into the world, has it not brought great disaster to the world? It was because of Daji's younger sister that there was the chaos of the Shang dynasty. It was because of the mystical silver fox that there was the tragedy of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, as well as Buddhism and Taoism, fighting each other. We cultivators sealed the nine-tailed celestial fox, but I didn't expect that you would not change your mind. You still want to release the nine-tailed celestial fox at all costs. Do you want to confuse the world and bring disaster to the common people?" Yan Fang's words were too powerful, and the power was no less than that of a dagger throwing a spear. All the cultivators of various sects looked at the people of the Fox Zen school coldly. Yesterday's update. Vote for recommendation previous page and next page error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 510. Go to Watch Net. The little foxes looked at each other in horror and confusion. Su Chan was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She shouted, "You're talking nonsense. We've never had such an idea." Yan Fang sneered disdainfully and said, "Of course, a thief won't call himself a thief." Ruan Hongling was also shocked and whispered to Ziyuan, "Shiji Ziyuan, is this true or not?" However, Ziyuan shook her head and said, "You've been dealing with him for so long. Don't you know what kind of person he is? He's definitely not that kind of person." "I believe him." Ruan Hongling nodded and said, "I believe it too, but the problem now is, this is a matter of offending all the cultivators in the world. What should we do? Should we help him?" Ziyuan looked at him with a complicated look in her eyes. She sighed softly and said in a low voice, "I don't seem to have any other choice." At this time, Ruan Hongling also seemed to have made up her mind. She gritted her teeth and said, "Anyway, our Lingong sect is used to being alone now. At worst, we will become enemies with the whole world. It's not a big deal." As soon as she finished speaking, she took a deep breath, wanting to use her true essence to protect her body in order to guard against any possible changes. Watch Net. 7 KOM. But as soon as Ruan Hongling took a deep breath, her expression changed dramatically. She cried out involuntarily, "I can't mobilize my Zhenqi." Her shout stunned the cultivators of the other sections. They subconsciously tried to adjust their Zhenqi, but they suddenly found that the Zhenqi in their bodies was as heavy as cement. No matter how hard they tried, they could not move it as they wished. This was no small matter, and everyone immediately turned pale with fright. "I can't mobilize my true essence either." "Me too." What's going on? Is he poisoned? The Gazao sect was responsible for supplying everyone with tea and snacks, so when they realized that they had suddenly been poisoned, they immediately looked at Wang Zhenyuan. However, when they saw that Wang Zhenyuan's face was also pale and his eyes were filled with shock and anger, they could not help but be stunned. Wang Zhenyuan said slowly to the crowd, "Don't look at me. I can't mobilize my Zhenqi either." Everyone was in an uproar and asked, "Then what's going on?" Zhou Ping said to Zhang Ling with a pale face, "Master, can you mobilize your Zhenqi? Why do I feel so lazy?" Zhang Ling's face darkened. She shook her head slightly and said in a low voice, "I can't. My true energy seems to have solidified. I can't move it. My feelings are similar to yours." Zhou Ping was both shocked and angry. "Who poisoned him? How dare you?" Zhang Ling looked at Zhuang Yiting coldly. She sneered and said, "Who else could it be other than this lunatic? Don't talk and focus on circulating your qi." As she spoke, she closed her eyes, completely ignoring the chaotic situation around her, and began to circulate her qi on her own. Zi Yuan and the others tried to mobilize their true qi, but they also found that the true qi in their bodies was as heavy as a 1,000-pound stone. They couldn't mobilize it at all, and even if they did, it was extremely slow, like a worm crawling. Seeing that Li Yundong's eyes were closed and there was no expression on his face, she couldn't help but ask, "Li Yundong, how are you?" After a while, Li Yundong opened his eyes and said in a low voice, "No, my true energy seems to have solidified. I can't mobilize it at all." Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, couldn't help but say in horror, "Master, I can still mobilize a little true energy. Why can't you mobilize any at all?" Li Yundong's face was cold and he didn't say anything. Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly said, "Could it be that the higher one's cultivation is, the deeper the poison will be? Could it be that this is the immortal fall? The immortal fall? What is this?" Zhou Qin, Su Chan, and the others asked in surprise. Zi Yuan looked at Yen Fong in shock and said, "Isn't the immortal fall already lost? How did she get it again? This kind of poison doesn't cause any harm when it enters the body, but it will slow down the blood flow and stagnate the aura of the whole body. True energy is driven by qi and blood. If qi and blood are slow, true energy will be activated slowly. Therefore, this kind of poison is the great nemesis of cultivators. The higher the cultivation of a person, the deeper the poison will be." Wan Hongling said in surprise, "Could it be that the poison is in the tea?" Zhou Qin immediately said, "I didn't drink the tea, but I was also poisoned." Su Chan's heart skipped a beat. She said loudly, "I know." The little girl pointed to the incense burner on the field and said, "Is it this one?" At this time, most of the people also came to their senses. They hadn't expected that so many cultivators here would be defeated by a little girl like Song Yuqiao. Everyone looked at Song Yuqiao angrily and said, "Little girl, did you order the immortal fall?" Song Yuqiao was so scared by the angry gazes of so many cultivators that she trembled all over. She hid behind Yen Fong with the pipa in her arms, not daring to show her head or speak. Wang Zhenyuan laughed angrily and said, "I didn't expect it, I really didn't expect it. Yen Fong, you actually instigated my disciple to rebel. Good, that's really good." Yen Fong sneered and said, "Your disciple? Ha ha ha, Xiaoqiao has been my disciple since she was 5 years old, but she's not famous yet." Wang Zhenyuan was shocked. "Have you been planning this since then?" Yen Fong sneered and said, "I just arranged it casually. I didn't expect that it would lead to such a result." "Huh, it's really God's will." Wang Zhenyuan laughed angrily and said, "Good method, really good method. However, this is a grudge between you and the Fox Zen school. Why do you want us to get involved?" Yen Fong laughed and said, if it weren't for this, how could we have schemed against these evildoers of the Fox Zen school? When everyone heard this, they all started cursing. For a moment, there was a lot of dirty words in the field. However, Yan Fang turned a deaf ear to them. She snorted and said, if the ruler is not secretive, he will lose his subject. If the subject is not secretive, he will lose his own life. If he is not secretive, he will cause harm. I think you'd better save some strength. You should know that the more you use your strength, the more effective the immortal fall will be. Be careful not to lose your cultivation after the effect of the medicine is gone. If that happens, don't blame me. When everyone heard this, they became even angrier, but no one dared to speak loudly. They all closed their mouths and began to concentrate on mobilizing their zhenqi. Seeing that everyone had quieted down, Yan Fang said to Li Yundong and the others, Li Yundong, now you are like a turtle in a jar. If you have any last words, just say them quickly. Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the others were all furious. They glared at Yan Fang, but Li Yundong's face was calm. He said coldly, how is Ao Wushuang? Yan Fang laughed and said, you can't even protect yourself. Why are you still thinking about that B*TCHAO Wushuang? Li Yundong didn't get angry. He fixed his eyes on Yan Fang and said, I just want to know what you did to her. Yan Fang snorted. With a flick of her wrist, she took out a small purple bell from her bosom. At a glance, Li Yunyang saw that the small bell was about the size of a palm. It was purple and carved with exquisite patterns. It was the emperor's clock. Yan Fang sneered and said, Ao Wushuang is in it. Do you want to save her? Li Yundong nodded and said, since the emperor's clock is with you, I'm relieved. Yan Fang was stunned. She said with some vigilance, what do you want to do? As soon as she finished speaking, Li Yundong suddenly opened his eyes, and his eyes shone brightly. His body was like a fierce tiger, and he rushed toward Yan Fang like lightning. Yan Fang suddenly turned pale with horror. She exclaimed, impossible. How can you still use qi? As she spoke, she subconsciously blocked with her palms in front of her. The palms of the two of them collided with a loud bang. Yan Fang's body trembled violently, as if she had been hit by an electric current. Li Yundong quickly lowered his body and poked at Yan Fang's qi-hai acupoint with his fingers. Yan Fang had suffered losses in Li Yundong's hands one after another before, and her fear of him had already gone deep into her subconscious. She was hit by Li Yundong's palm force, and her whole body was numb. For a moment, her reaction was a little slow, and Li Yundong poked the qi-hai acupoint in her lower abdomen. The qi-hai acupoint was a major acupoint of the Ren meridian of the human body. Once it was poked, the whole body would be numb and unable to exert any strength. Yan Fang immediately fell to the ground. She looked at Li Yundong in shock and anger and said, impossible, how can you still move? At this time, Li Yundong was also a little out of breath. His face was pale, but he just stared at Yan Fang and didn't say anything. Seeing his appearance, Yan Fang suddenly had an idea. She laughed and said, you really deserve it. You can't live. You're courting death. After being hit by my immortal fall, you still tried to use qi to struggle. Now look. You found that you can't move your whole body, right? A layer of sweat appeared on Li Yundong's forehead. He said coldly, can you move? Yan Fang sneered and said, humph, we're all the same, so there's no need to criticize each other. However, don't forget that I still have my disciple here. As she said this, she shouted to Song Yuqiao behind her, Xiaoqiao, go up and kill this evil man. Zhou Qin and Su Chan were so shocked that they wanted to grit their teeth and stand up, especially Zhou Qin. Many of her bones were broken. As soon as she was about to move, the pain made her break out in a cold sweat. She snorted and almost collapsed on the spot. Zi Yuan was quick to react. She immediately grabbed Su Chan and Zhou Qin and said in a low voice, "Don't do anything stupid. Don't move after being hit by the immortal fall. After the effect of the drug passes, you will recover on your own. If you force yourself to move, you will be like Li Yundong now. On the contrary, you won't be able to move at all. Moreover, the recovery time will be greatly extended." Zhou Qin didn't say anything. She gritted her teeth, as if she was enduring the severe pain. Su Chan's face was full of shock and anger. She shouted, "Should I just watch Yundong be killed?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "Don't be silly. Li Yundong has been preparing for this day for a long time. However, he didn't expect that Yan Fang would use such a powerful poison as the immortal fall. He will be fine. Don't worry." Su Chan stared at her in surprise and doubt. What? Did Yundong know that Zhuang Yiting Shibua was Yan Fang? Zi Yuan nodded gently. That's right. Su Chan and the others were shocked. They couldn't help but look at the field. Zi Yuan sighed softly. It's just that I really didn't expect the Taoist assembly to turn out like this. Too many accidents have happened together. The situation is already chaotic and out of control. At this time, the cultivators of the various sects on the sidelines were all closing their eyes to circulate their qi. They could hear everything clearly, but none of them were in the mood to help either side. What if their cultivation quotient regressed greatly in the future if they moved? It was a dog-eat-dog situation on both sides. They could just watch the fire from the other side. Chapter 5:11. When Song Yuqiao heard Yan Fang's roar, she was so shocked that her whole body trembled. Her eyelids kept twitching, and her long eyelashes trembled gently. Her eyes were full of fear. She was weak and introverted. Usually, it would take her a long time to step on an ant. Now she was asked to kill someone, which really scared her soul out of her body. What's more, the person she was going to kill was Li Yundong, who had shown great power to drive the Japanese away. Song Yuqiao's teeth were chattering. She looked at Li Yundong. Not to mention whether she was willing or not, and not to mention whether Li Yundong had the ability to resist, just thinking about Li Yundong's awe-inspiring power made her legs weak and her whole body weak. Go to the internet. The poor little girl said in a trembling voice, Master, I don't dare. Yan Fang was so angry that she raised her eyebrows and said, You be ****, I've taught you for so long. Why wouldn't you dare? Song Yuqiao's eyes were filled with tears of shock and fear. She said in a trembling voice, But I just don't dare. Master, this is a human being. How can you ask me to kill him? Only then did Yan Fang remember that the nominal disciple she had accepted was very weak. It was too much to ask her to kill someone. She suppressed her anger and said softly, Silly disciple, this person is a great villain. If you kill him, you can save many people, including you and your master. You are doing justice on behalf of heaven. Not only will everyone in the world not blame you, but they will also thank you. Song Yuqiao's parents had died when she was a child, and she had been adopted by Yan Fang as a disciple since she was a child. To her, Yan Fang was like a parent, but also like a master. Therefore, Yan Fang's words were extremely heavy and could be said to be as heavy as a mountain. After hearing this, she couldn't help but feel a little braver. She asked timidly, Is it true, master? Seeing that Song Yuqiao was moved, Yan Fang was overjoyed and continued to say softly, Of course it's true. When have I ever lied to you? After you kill this person, I'll take you far away to a place where no one can find you. We'll live happily ever after, okay? Song Yuqiao's face was full of surprise. She asked tentatively, Master, are you serious? You won't you abandon me again? Yan Fang sighed softly and said, Silly girl, how can I bear to leave you behind? Think about it, if the man you love the most was snatched away by someone else, would you want to take revenge? If it were you and you discovered such a shocking conspiracy, would you want to stop them and save the world? Song Yuqiao thought very seriously. She bit her red lips hard with her snow-white teeth, and there seemed to be a battle in her mind. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others all looked at Song Yuqiao nervously, waiting for this weak little girl to make a decision. Song Yuqiao stared at Yan Fang closely. She hesitated for a long time, then suddenly gritted her teeth. She took the golden hairpin from her hair, held it tightly with both hands, and walked toward Li Yunyang, trembling all over. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin exclaimed at the same time, "Stop! No! How dare you!" The little foxes also exclaimed at the same time, "Don't kill him. Leader is the best person in the world. Don't kill him. If you want to kill someone, kill us." When Song Yuqiao heard their shouts, she couldn't help but tremble and stop again. She looked at Su Chan and the others, only to see that they were looking at her with frightened and pleading eyes, as if they couldn't wait to die for Li Yunyang. Song Yuqiao hesitated for a moment. As soon as she hesitated, Yan Fang, who was behind her, immediately said loudly, "What are you hesitating for? These are all vixens in the world. They can do nothing but bring disaster to the world. Do you want to see the world in chaos? Do you want to be the culprit who helps the evildoer? In the future, when the world is in chaos and the people suffer, you will be the initiator." Song Yuqiao's body trembled. She gritted her teeth, forcibly looked away, and walked toward Li Yunyang. Song Yuqiao walked up to Li Yunyang. She lowered her head and said in a sobbing tone, Don't blame me. I didn't want to." As she said this, she raised the golden hairpin in her hand high. For a moment, the people who had been closing their eyes to control their qi couldn't help opening their eyes. They widened their eyes and couldn't believe that Li Yunyang, who could even be dispelled by Mahamayuri, was going to die in the hands of such a weak girl. Everyone saw that the golden hairpin was long, thin, and extremely sharp. The sharp thorns reflected dazzling light in the sunlight shining in from outside the building, dazzling everyone's eyes for a moment. Song Yuqiao held the golden hairpin trembling all over and was about to push it forward, but at this time, she couldn't help but look at Li Yunyang. She saw that Li Yunyang was staring at her. Not only was there no hatred or anger in his eyes, but they were very gentle and full of sympathy. This kind of gaze was like warm seawater, wrapping Song Yuqiao tightly, making her involuntarily think, why doesn't he hate me? Why is he looking at me like this? Song Yuqiao said in panic, "Why are you looking at me?" Li Yunyang smiled slightly, sighed, and said, "If you don't look at me, how do you know I'm looking at you?" Song Yuqiao immediately looked away in horror. "I'm not looking at you. Don't look at me." Li Yunyang smiled and said, "What you were looking at just now was not me, but your heart. Even if you look away, it's useless, because you can't face your own heart. You don't believe that I'm a bad person at all, do you?" This sentence hit Song Yuqiao like a bolt of lightning. She trembled all over and couldn't help opening her mouth wide. A voice in her heart shouted loudly, he would rather withdraw from the Taoist assembly himself than take the immortal pen and bear the responsibility for his disciple. He was forced by everyone to lose the qualification to participate in the competition, but he didn't say a word of evil. Instead, he turned the tide at the critical moment. Could such a responsible and courageous man be a bad person? Could a person with such a gentle and kind gaze be a bad person? Song Yuqiao stood there like a statue. Although Yan Fang, who was behind her, couldn't see her expression, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She couldn't help saying loudly, "Xiao Qiao, don't listen to his evil words. This person is best at bewitching people. You have to control yourself, Xiao Qiao. There are so many people waiting for you to save them." Song Yuqiao couldn't help looking back at Yan Fang, and then at Li Yunyang. Suddenly, the golden hairpin in her hand fell to the ground with a clang. She covered her face with both hands and cried, "Master, I can't do it. I really can't do it. I'm sorry." As she said this, she quickly ran downstairs. Yan Fang was furious and shouted, "Useless thing, come back. Come back quickly." But no matter how she shouted, Song Yuqiao didn't look back. She sobbed all the way and gradually went away. Only Yan Fang's angry roar echoed in the small building. Only then did Su Chan and the others relax and breathe a sigh of relief. Ruan Hongling sneered and said, "Humph, let's see what other tricks Yan Fang has up her sleeve." After Zi Yuan was relieved, she closed her eyes and said in a deep voice, "Don't talk. Concentrate on running your qi." Ruan Hongling glanced around and saw that everyone upstairs had closed their eyes and were quietly running their qi. At this time, whoever could recover first would be the strongest master on the scene and would be able to control the power of life and death. Even Yan Fang suppressed her anger and stopped talking. She closed her eyes and concentrated on running her qi. Ruan Hongling's heart skipped a beat. She whispered to Zi Yuan, "Shiji Zi Yuan, what if someone comes at this time?" Zi Yuan didn't even open her eyes. She said, "The immortal fall in this incense burner is still burning. As long as you get close to it and smell it, your cultivation will drop to the lowest point. You won't be able to run your qi, and you'll be even worse than an ordinary person who has no strength to truss a chicken. However, if an ordinary person comes at this time, it will be terrible, because ordinary people will not be affected by the immortal fall." Hearing this, Ruan Hongling immediately closed her eyes. She thought to herself, if an ordinary person came and killed everyone here with a steel knife, it would be the most ridiculous thing in the world. I can't die in the hands of an ordinary person. At this time, everyone upstairs was concentrating on running their qi. For a moment, the atmosphere was stagnant and quiet. The originally quiet and elegant building was now as quiet as a cemetery, which made people's hair stand on end. All the cultivators in the building were motionless like stone statues. The air around them seemed to have frozen. Only the first-grade immortal incense in the incense burner was slowly burning, emitting wisps of faint smoke that spread out in all directions. Time passed bit by bit, and the sky slowly changed from a golden crow hanging high in the sky to a jade rabbit rising. The sky gradually darkened. In the distance of the garden building, a young man hiding in the corner of a dark alley couldn't help but say to an old man beside him, "Master Purin, it's almost dark. How long do we have to wait?" Master Purin of Shiyuan Temple was dressed in ordinary clothes. He lowered his eyes, as if he was standing in meditation. He said softly, "Feikong, why are you in such a hurry? The devil hasn't made a move yet, so naturally, we can't." Feikong looked a little anxious. "But how long do we have to wait?" Purin smiled slightly, opened his eyes, and said, "When the devil can't help but make a move, we will naturally activate the Bafang demon subduing formation and subdue him." Feikong took a deep breath and said, "What if he doesn't make a move?" Purin smiled, closed his eyes again, put his palms together, and chanted the name of Buddha. "Amitba, if he doesn't make a move today, he will sooner or later." Feikong had no choice but to suppress his temper again, put his palms together, and silently recited the scripture. After an unknown period of time, the immortal fall in the incense burner on the small building suddenly dimmed. This peerless poisonous smoke, which had made many cultivators surrender, was finally exhausted. Just as the last wisp of fragrance gradually dissipated in the air, two figures suddenly floated into the small building. The two of them stood side by side. Their figures were graceful under the moonlight, but their faces could not be seen clearly. The taller one quickly glanced around the small building, smiled slightly, and said faintly, "Yan Fang, you didn't expect this day to come, did you?" The other one gnashed her teeth and sneered. Shimmy, why are you talking to her? Hurry up and kill her. When Yan Fang heard this voice, she immediately opened her eyes. She took a closer look and was shocked. It's you? Chapter 5:12. At this time, there were two women standing in the field. One was petite but graceful. It was Lu Yuehong of the Fox Zen School. Next to her stood a charming and seductive woman. It was Chao Yi, who had disappeared before. Yan Fang suddenly saw the two of them and was shocked. She asked in surprise, "Why are you two here?" But she quickly reacted. She gritted her teeth and looked at Li Yundong. "So you already knew?" Li Yundong's face was expressionless. He didn't even open his eyes and didn't speak. "Go to see the net." Lu Yuehong, who was standing on the field with a frosty expression, said, "That's right. Leader has known for a long time." Yan Fang said loudly, "That's impossible. When did you know that I had possessed Zhuang Yiting?" Lu Yuehong snorted and said, "You pretended very well, but the net of heaven has long arms." Yan Fang sneered and said, "How could the two of you and Li Yundong, who is so careless, notice it?" As she said this, she suddenly turned her head and glared at Zi Yuan, saying angrily, "You must have noticed it, didn't you?" At this time, Zi Yuan also opened her eyes. She nodded slightly and said, "Yes, I noticed it, but Li Yundong was sure of it." Yan Fang shouted angrily, "That's impossible. Where did I make a mistake?" Zi Yuan said unhurriedly, "Since the last time we went to the buffet, Li Yundong asked us to buy clothes, and you took the opportunity to show up. I had some doubts. Because at that time, your yang spirit was extremely strong. Unless you had a host, it was impossible for your cultivation to not have regressed at all. So at that time, I immediately went to the place where the people of the Fox Zen School were changing clothes. At that time, everyone was outside, and only you and Chao Yi were in the changing room. At this time, I had already targeted the two of you." Yan Fang stared at Zi Yuan and sneered, her eyes full of sarcasm. Zi Yuan quickly said, "Of course, I also guessed that you might have shown up on purpose to arouse our suspicion and make the Fox Zen School kill each other, right?" Yan Fang's expression changed. She snorted and said nothing. Zi Yuan knew that she had guessed correctly, so she said, "But what I don't understand is that you hid very well after that, until one day, you suddenly appeared and led us to Mount Gazao. You wanted to expose Li Yundong in front of everyone and take his life. Why did you do that?" Yan Fang stared at Zi Yuan for a long time. Suddenly, she laughed and said, "Finally, there's something you don't know, Zi Yuan. This is truly shocking and lamentable." In the face of Yan Fang's sarcasm, Zi Yuan didn't get angry. She just smiled faintly and said, "I was born on a cliff, and my knowledge is boundless. It's normal for me to have things I don't know. What's so strange about it? Martial uncle, don't you always boast of your meticulous schemes? Don't you want to know when Li Yundong realized that Zhuang Yiting was you?" Yan Fang's expression changed greatly. She immediately asked, "When did he notice it?" Zi Yuan smiled and said, "When Desanxian was established, President Chao came to congratulate you. When you first saw her, you were extremely shocked. Later, President Chao left Desanxian and told him where she was going. That night, she was almost killed, and only we knew where she lived. So the murderer could only be among us. At that time, Li Yundong went to the scene of the murder and accidentally found some evidence at the scene. This evidence is exactly where you were smart all your life, but you were muddle-headed for a moment." Yan Fang said with a sullen face, "What evidence?" Zi Yuan snorted and said, "Although there was not much blood left at the scene, and it was the same as the bloody clothes that Li Yundong asked Su Chan to find in Chao Yi's room, Li Yundong used a method to find two kinds of blood on the clothes and at the scene of the murder at the same time. One was Chao Yi's, and the other was yours. Yan Fang said in surprise, how is that possible? How did you know? Zi Yuan looked at Yan Fang sympathetically. She sighed slightly and said, Sherbua, you are really smart all your life, but you are muddle-headed for a moment. Have you forgotten that in modern society, there is a kind of science called blood testing and DNA testing? Yan Fang suddenly trembled all over. Her mouth was slightly open, and her face was full of disbelief. It seemed that she hadn't expected that she would be so careless that she would make a mistake in this simplest link. Zi Yuan sighed and said, when the police sent the report the next day, Li Yundong knew that you and Chao Yi had gone to President Chao's residence at the same time, but you claimed that you hadn't gone out. Isn't that a confession? You worked so hard to frame Chao Yi, but you didn't expect to be killed because of this, did you? Yan Fang's expression changed a few times. She gritted her teeth and said, no wonder Li Yundong appeared there again. Humph. She looked at Chao Yi unwillingly and sneered. You must be very proud now, right? Chao Yi stared at Yan Fang coldly and said noncommittally, you are about to die. What else do you want to say? Lu Yuehong, who was standing to one side, glared at Yan Fang and said sternly, Shimmy, what else is there to say to this person? How many people has she harmed? From eldest Shiji Mo Ashi to Yiyu, and then to Zhuang Yiting? Today, I will make you pay with your blood. After that, Lu Yuehong let out a shrill roar and pounced on Yan Fang angrily. Her fingers were like hooks, as if she wanted to dig out Yan Fang's heart with one hand. But as soon as Lu Yuehong's hand touched Yan Fang's body, Yan Fang suddenly moved. She clasped Lu Yuehong's arm with both hands and twisted it hard. Then she kicked Lu Yuehong's body heavily with her leg. Lu Yuehong hadn't expected that Yan Fang would still be able to move. She suddenly screamed, and the bones in her arm were broken. Her body flew out like a sandbag. Everyone was shocked by this turn of events. They did not expect Yan Fang to be the first to recover. The expressions of Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the others changed dramatically, and Zi Yuan's face suddenly became very ugly. Yan Fang laughed wildly and said, you didn't expect this, did you? As she said this, she looked at Li Yundong with a murderous look in her eyes. Yan Fang knew that as long as she killed him, the Fox Zen school would collapse without a fight. As soon as Chao Yi saw this, she immediately said in a cold voice, if you want to kill the leader, you have to get through me first. Yan Fang glared at Chao Yi fiercely. You always go against me. Humph, do you think you're a good person? Just in time, I'll settle old and new grudges with you together. After that, she let out a shrill scream and was about to pounce on him. Unexpectedly, at this moment, Li Yundong suddenly opened his eyes, and an extremely sharp gaze shot toward Yan Fang like a sharp arrow. Yan Fang's heart suddenly trembled. She thought to herself, damn it, has this little thief recovered? Her subconscious fear of Li Yundong was extremely deep, so she immediately gave up the idea of going forward. Yan Fang's mind raced like lightning. She soon thought, even if this evil thief has recovered, it doesn't matter. As long as I grab the immortal pen, even if he has great ability, he can't do anything to me. Thinking of this, Yan Fang suddenly stopped moving forward, twisted her body, and pounced on Wang Zhenyuan. At this time, Wang Zhenyuan had been poisoned by the fragrance of the immortal fall, so he was defenseless. He could only watch helplessly as Yan Fang approached him and slapped him in the chest. Wang Zhenyuan's mind was like lightning, and he was cunning. He immediately understood what Yan Fang meant, so he immediately gathered all the strength in his body and threw the immortal pen toward the field. Then he ran away like a wisp of smoke. Yan Fang sneered in her heart. Without looking at Wang Zhenyuan, she turned her head to grab the immortal pen. However, she saw the immortal pen roll in the air and fall to the ground with a clatter. A girl bent down and reached out to pick up the pen. The girl was tall and dressed fashionably and beautifully. Who else could it be but Ding Nan? Yan Fang was shocked. She hadn't expected that someone would have recovered. She immediately shouted with a ferocious face, "Put down the immortal pen." Ding Nan's cultivation was later than Zhou Qin's, and she didn't have the help of Renyuan Jindan. In particular, she hadn't built the Zhuji phase and hadn't even stepped into the threshold of cultivation, so her cultivation was the lowest here. However, the power of the immortal fall was that the higher one's cultivation was, the deeper the poison would be. On the contrary, it would be easier for those with lower cultivation to recover. When Ding Nan saw the immortal pen flying toward her, she subconsciously picked it up, but it immediately attracted Yan Fang's killing intent. For a moment, she was a little afraid and hesitated. Should she throw the immortal pen out or keep it? Unexpectedly, Zheng Yuan suddenly opened his eyes and shouted, "Pinger, run!" Without thinking, Ding Nan subconsciously turned around and ran. Yan Fang was extremely angry and shouted, "Stop!" She moved like lightning and caught up with Ding Nan in the blink of an eye. Like a tiger catching a sheep, she grabbed Ding Nan's neck with one hand. At this time, only Yan Fang, Ding Nan, and Chao Yi, who was guarding Li Yundong, could move. At this time, Chao Yi was focused on Li Yundong. As long as Li Yundong was fine, even if everyone around her died, her expression would not change. Seeing that Yan Fang was about to grab Ding Nan, Zheng Yuan suddenly took out a Rui jade from his arms. He quickly bit his index finger and smeared his blood on the handle of the Rui jade. Then, he shouted, "Yan Fang." As soon as the Rui jade was stained with blood, a lot of black qi immediately emerged, becoming terrifying and ferocious. An invisible black mist instantly rushed toward Yan Fang's body. When Yan Fang heard Zheng Yuan's shout, she immediately felt her heart beat violently, as if someone was pinching it. She could hardly breathe and lost all her strength. For a moment, Yan Fang lost control of her body and fell to the ground in the blink of an eye. However, she soon regained her strength and got up. She looked at Zheng Yuan in shock and anger and shouted, "What kind of powerful magical weapon is this?" Cultivators often fought with lightning and thunder, and it happened in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Yan Fang almost lost all control of her body. It was incredible that a cultivator like her would fall to the ground. If it weren't for the fact that Zheng Yuan had not fully recovered at this time and could only barely control his qi, Yan Fang would have been dead by now. In Yan Fang's opinion, the powerful magical weapon in Zheng Yuan's hand was simply sinister and vicious. If caught off guard, even a Jinxian would suffer a big setback and might even be doomed eternally. After Zheng Yuan shouted, his face suddenly turned pale, and a layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. He turned to Ding Nan and said, "Pinger, you go first. I'll hold her back." At this time, Ding Nan was already standing at the railing on the second floor, staring at everyone present in horror and vigilance. As long as there was the slightest movement, she would immediately jump over the railing and escape. However, the scheming Ding Nan also knew that she hadn't even reached the Zhuji phase. Even if she could escape, she wouldn't be able to get far. Holding an immortal pen was like holding a gold ingot and walking in a busy city. She would definitely be killed. Therefore, she didn't rush to escape. Instead, she pretended to be concerned and said loudly to Zheng Yuan, "Master, if you don't go, I won't go either." Zheng Yuan was greatly moved, and the last trace of suspicion he had for Ding Nan disappeared. He took a deep breath, and his snow-white face suddenly flushed. He sneered at Yan Fang and said, "Zhenren Yan, I'm going to take this immortal pen today. If you don't want to die, come up." I'm sorry, I've been busy outside for a whole day, and I've just entered the house. Chapter 513. Yan Fang hadn't expected that Zheng Yuan would suddenly intervene regardless of everything. She immediately sneered and said, "Zheng Yuan, your powerful magical weapon is indeed powerful, but do you think you can stop me like this?" As she said this, Yan Fang suddenly took out a talisman and poured all her Zhenqi into it. The talisman immediately burned and instantly turned into a black shadow that pounced on Ding Nan. Go to see net. 7 K.O.M. Zheng Yuan's face changed. He knew that this was the Liujiayi master talisman, and this black shadow was transformed from a resentful spirit. His powerful magical weapon could be used to deal with living people, but it couldn't deal with such a resentful spirit. His face changed, and his eyes turned. He immediately shouted at Yan Fang again, "Yan Fang." As soon as Yan Fang was called by Zheng Yuan, she immediately lost control of her body and fell to the ground with a plop. She flew into a rage out of humiliation and let out a shrill roar. The black shadow she had sent out immediately rushed toward Ding Nan more fiercely. Ding Nan was so shocked that her eyes suddenly widened. Just as she was about to turn around and run away, she suddenly heard Zhou Qin shout, "Ding Nan, do you want to die? Throw away the immortal pen." Ding Nan's body trembled. Zhou Qin had left a deep impression in her heart for a long time, so she subconsciously threw the immortal pen in her hand toward the field. As soon as she threw it out, Yan Fang immediately let out another shrill roar. As soon as the black shadow rushed to Ding Nan, it suddenly turned around and pounced on the immortal pen. Ding Nan only felt a bone-chilling yin qi pass in front of her, and all her hair stood on end in an instant. She knew that she had just taken a turn at the gate of hell. If it hadn't been for Zhou Qin's reminder, she would have been dead by now. But before Ding Nan could think deeply, she saw the situation suddenly change. After the immortal pen was thrown out by her, it landed in front of a Taoist priest of the Qingwei sect. The Taoist priest's eyes suddenly lit up. He immediately picked up the immortal pen with the tip of his foot, and then immediately pinched his fingers together. He slapped at the Liujiayi master talisman that Yan Fang had released and shouted, "Thunder!" With a rumble, a bolt of lightning shot out from his hand and turned the resentful ghost into a cloud of green smoke. But before he could be happy for long, someone behind him slapped him hard on the back, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood, and the immortal pen in his hand fell to the ground. The man turned his head and saw that it was a Taoist priest of the Jinshan sect. He was holding the immortal pen in one hand, and he didn't even have time to withdraw his other hand from his back. He laughed wildly and said, "Immortal pen. I got the immortal pen." Zheng Yuan's heart skipped a beat. He also knew that Yan Fang was an extreme person. Once she became enemies, it would definitely be a terrible thing that would not end until she died. If she really did what she said, it would really make people restless. Since ancient times, there had only been one who could be a thief for 1,000 days. How could one guard against a thief for 1,000 days? Zheng Yuan's heart was filled with evil thoughts. He wanted to kill Yan Fang, but just as he was about to mobilize his Zhenqi, he suddenly felt short of breath and couldn't breathe. A strange red color appeared on his face, and his breathing became extremely rapid. He coughed violently twice and even coughed up blood. Yan Fang laughed and said, "You brought this on yourself. You forced yourself to control your qi. Now you regret it. Go to hell." After that, she moved her body and was about to step forward. But as soon as she finished speaking, she heard a young man shout coldly, "Yan Fang, you can't even protect yourself. You'd better take care of yourself." When Yan Fang heard this voice, her whole body suddenly trembled. She turned her head and saw Li Yundong looking at her with a sneer on his face, slowly walking toward her step by step. This time, Yan Fang was almost scared out of her wits, and she regretted it so much that her intestines almost turned green. In an instant, Yan Fang realized that Li Yundong had not fully recovered just now. He had just stared at her with his eyes and dispersed her killing intent, making her think that Li Yundong had already had room to fight back. Therefore, she had some concerns in her heart and didn't dare to make a move against him. But now, Li Yundong had completely recovered. When this evil thief recovered, how could she be his match? She could only hate herself for not having a firm will at the beginning and not decisively attacking Li Yundong. Otherwise, how could she have ended up like this? Yan Fang's thoughts raced like lightning. She let out a shrill scream of unwillingness. Her face became extremely ferocious and terrifying, and her black hair stood on end. She said sternly, "Li Yundong, I'm not done with you." After that, her yang spirit went out of her body in an instant. Her ferocious and mournful face also froze, and her body fell to the ground like a stone. Her yang spirit turned into a blue light and quickly escaped from the small building. Li Yundong's eyes widened and he shouted, "Where are you going?" He immediately sent his yang spirit out of his body and chased after her with the burning thumb pot. In this small building, Li Yundong and Yan Fang, who had recovered the fastest, left in the blink of an eye. For a moment, everyone's eyes were fixed on Zheng Yuan, who was holding the immortal pen. Before long, they shouted in unison and rushed toward Zheng Yuan like crazy. Zheng Yuan's face changed greatly. He gritted his teeth, pointed to the few people at the front, and shouted their names repeatedly. Suddenly, these people trembled all over. Zheng Yuan's powerful magical weapon could seize souls. When he shouted the other party's name, the ghost and the jade rui would instantly rush into the other party's body and hook their souls. If the other party's cultivation was profound and the Niden was vigorous and condensed, then the ghost could not hook the other party's soul. It could only temporarily cause the other party's qi and blood to stagnate, thus making the other party fall and lose the ability to resist. If this person's foundation was weak, then the 3 souls and 7 spirits would immediately be hooked out of the body by the ghost and killed by Zheng Yuan's powerful magical weapon in the blink of an eye. After Zheng Yuan shouted the names of these people, they fell to the ground like wooden stakes. Their faces turned pale, and in the blink of an eye, they were no longer alive. A mass of colorful qi was pulled out of the 7 orifices of the people who had fallen to the ground by a mass of black qi, and then it rushed toward Zheng Yuan's jade rui. As soon as the 3 souls and 7 spirits of these people were hooked back to the jade rui, the black qi all over its body immediately surged, as if it had swallowed the 3 souls and 7 spirits of these people, and its power had greatly increased. When everyone saw this, they were all shocked. Someone pointed at Zheng Yuan in horror and scolded him sternly, "Zheng Yuan, how dare you refine such a sinister and vicious powerful magical weapon in private? Aren't you afraid of retribution? Zheng Yuan, are you looking for death? How dare you use such a sinister and inferior powerful magical weapon? Aren't you afraid of divine retribution? How dare you kill my fellow disciples? Zheng Yuan, the Jinshan sect will not let you off." Zhou Qin also looked at the powerful magical weapon in Zheng Yuan's hand in horror and said in fear, "What kind of powerful magical weapon is this? Is it so powerful? He died as soon as I shouted his name." Zi Yuan also looked at Zheng Yuan in horror. There was fear in her eyes as she said, "Could this be the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade? Wasn't this powerful magical weapon destroyed during the Zhengde period of the Ming dynasty? How could it have been refined again?" Su Chan also looked at Zheng Yuan in horror. She was afraid that if he turned his head and shouted her name, she would die. She said in a trembling voice, "How could there be such an evil powerful magical weapon in the world? If it were to fall into the hands of an evil person, he could call out the name of the person within a range of 50 feet to reap their soul. The magic treasure would become stronger and stronger, and one day, the power of the magic treasure would surpass the power of the strongest person in the world of cultivation. At that time, the person holding the magic treasure would die if he called out the name of the person. Who can be his opponent?" Ruan Hongling also looked at Zheng Yuan in horror. She said, "Fortunately, Zheng Yuan was poisoned by the immortal fall at this time. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. If he hadn't been poisoned, I'm afraid that even if Taoist Master Zhang of the Jingyi school came in person, he wouldn't have dared to fight him face to face. He could only retreat and run away. This powerful magical weapon was said to be invincible within 50 feet during the Zhengde period. At that time, I thought it was just bragging, but now I see that it's really terrifying. The women were frightened by Zheng Yuan's powerful magical weapon, and so were the cultivators of the other sections. Even Zhang Ling, who had always been hot-tempered and hated evil, suddenly opened her eyes and looked at Zheng Yuan in horror and anger. She didn't dare to say anything, for fear that Zheng Yuan would shout her name in anger. Zheng Yuan saw that everyone was glaring at him, but most of them didn't dare to say anything. No one dared to come forward again. Zheng Yuan laughed wildly. He waved his sleeve, grabbed the immortal pen in one hand, and quickly rushed to Ding Nan. He shouted, "Let's go." Then he turned into a cloud of black smoke and left the small building in the blink of an eye. Zheng Yuan took Ding Nan and fled, and no one dared to chase after him. After flying for a long time, he finally returned to his cave in Mount Wuhua. As soon as he landed, he suddenly knelt on the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood. Ding Nan was shocked and hurriedly asked, "Master, what's wrong with you?" Zheng Yuan's face was as white as a sheet. He smiled bitterly, raised his trembling hand, and said to Ding Nan, "Quick, go and get the 9-turn spirit restoring pill. It's in the 7th purple bottle in the 3rd shelf of the closet." After that, he spat out another mouthful of blood. Ding Nan knew that this was the result of Zheng Yuan's forced qi flow just now. She immediately got up and hurriedly found the pill. But when she walked over to Zheng Yuan, she saw the old man lying on the ground and spitting out blood with his back facing her defenselessly. Ding Nan's heart suddenly skipped a beat, and a bold idea suddenly came to her mind. Now he has the immortal pen and the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade, and I have the threaded hairpin of soul traversing. As long as I kill this lecherous old man, with these 3 powerful magical weapons in hand, won't I be invincible in the world? Will Li Yundong still look at me in the eye? At the thought of this, Ding Nan's heart suddenly beat violently. Chapter 514. As soon as this thought came to Ding Nan's mind, her heart suddenly pounded as if it was going to jump out of her throat in the next second. Go to the internet. Desire was like a devil. Once it came, it was difficult to leave. In particular, Ding Nan gritted her teeth and clenched her fists when she saw Zheng Yuan weakly turning his back to her and constantly coughing up blood. Her hand slowly touched the threaded hairpin of soul traversal hidden at her waist. But when she was about to touch the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, she suddenly noticed that although Zheng Yuan had his back to her, one of his hands was still tightly grasping the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade. Ding Nan's heart suddenly skipped a beat. She thought, no, this old lecher has always been scheming and has always been on guard against me. Moreover, he always has a backup plan. If I fail to kill him, I'll be digging my own grave. What's more, even if I kill him now, I haven't reached the Zhuji phase and can't use these 3 powerful magical weapons. In the end, the other people of the Yin-Yang sect may take advantage of the situation. No, now is not the time to kill this old lecher. In the blink of an eye, Ding Nan's mind raced. Such intense psychological activity only lasted for a moment. Her hand quickly left the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, bent down to help Zheng Yuan up, poured the medicine into her palm, and fed it to him. After eating the 9-turn spirit restoration pill, Zheng Yuan circulated his qi for a while, and a trace of normal color returned to his face. He took a long breath, looked at Ding Nan meaningfully, and said, "Pinger, if you had any bad intentions just now, I'm afraid you wouldn't be alive now." Ding Nan's heart suddenly trembled. She thought to herself, that was close. This old lecher was indeed on guard. Ding Nan was shrewd and didn't show any fear on her face. Instead, she cried angrily, I didn't expect you to still be on guard against me at this time. What's the point of being your disciple? After that, she got up and was about to leave. Zheng Yuan quickly pulled her back with an apologetic smile and said softly, Good disciple, since you've been possessed by this woman, your temperament has changed greatly. It's inevitable that I have some concerns. You've done very well this time, and I'm very touched. Don't worry, I won't be suspicious of you anymore. Ding Nan's acting skills were excellent. She cried and said, You said the same thing last time, but in the end, you're still suspicious of me. Zheng Yuan hurriedly swore, If there's any falsehood in my words, may I be struck by lightning. Ding Nan wiped away her tears and asked tentatively, Really? Zheng Yuan nodded vigorously and said, Absolutely. Do you still not trust Master? Only then did Ding Nan turn her anger into joy. She turned her tears into a smile and said, Ping naturally trusts you. You showed your power today and got the immortal pen. Congratulations. But soon, Ding Nan said with a worried face, But Master, aren't you afraid of offending all the cultivation sects in the world? What if these people come to Mount Wuhua? Zheng Yuan said proudly, With the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade and the immortal pen, who in the world can be my opponent? Why should he be afraid of them? What's more, the cultivation world is in a mess now. How can they have time to make trouble for me? When I come out of seclusion for 10 days, I will definitely be invincible in the world. Ding Nan smiled and said respectfully, Then I'll congratulate Master in advance and show the power of our Yinyang sect. Zheng Yuan laughed heartily, while Ding Nan smiled coquettishly at the side. However, the look in her eyes kept flickering, hiding a deep chill. On the other side, after Wang Zhenyuan escaped from the small building, he immediately took a panacea and quickly rushed to the backyard. Wang Zhenyuan rushed into a room angrily and said in a low voice, Lu Yi, what's going on? Why did everything turn out like this? Didn't you say that everything was under your control? Lu Yi, the former leader of the Fox Zen school, was standing by the carved wooden window and looking at the dark sky. He smiled slightly and said confidently, Yes, everything is under my control. Wang Zhenyuan said angrily, T. Even I was hit by the immortal fall, and the Taoist assembly has become a joke. Zheng Yuan also took away the immortal pen. How can this be under your control? Lu Yi laughed and said, I know all of Yan Fang's plans. She has been suspecting that I'm not dead, so she tried every means to lure me out. Last time in the Gazao sect, she attacked Li Yundong in order to lure me out. This time at the Taoist assembly, if you don't get hit by the immortal fall, how can Yan Fang believe that you are an outsider who doesn't know anything? How can you get rid of the suspicion of all the sects in the future? Wang Zhenyuan was shocked and angry. You even schemed against me? Lu Yi smiled slightly. I had no choice. Wang Zhenyuan was about to lose his temper, but he forcibly restrained himself. He suppressed his anger and said, Well, even if what you said makes sense, what's the matter with the immortal pen? How can you watch Zheng Yuan take the immortal pen away? Didn't you see the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade in his hand? Now that he has the immortal pen in his hand, can you imagine how powerful he will be? Lu Yi smiled disdainfully. How powerful can a cultivator who relies on powerful magical weapons to dominate the world be? When the silver fox comes back to life, he won't be worth mentioning at all. Wang Zhenyuan said angrily, T. When you resurrect the mystical silver fox, he will have killed us all and become the king. Lu Yi laughed and said, Don't worry, Master Wan. Didn't you notice that his disciples seemed to be in harmony with him and had evil intentions? Wang Zhenyuan was stunned and said, That's right. How did you notice? Lu Yi sneered and said, There are two possibilities for Zheng Yuan to let her escape. One is that he wants to drag the enemy by himself and let Ding Nan escape. The other is that he wants Ding Nan to become the target of everyone and make her a scapegoat. Given Zheng Yuan's character, he would never do something that would harm himself and benefit others, so he must want to send his disciple to his death so that he can benefit from it. Wang Zhenyuan said with a cold face, but his disciple didn't run away at all. Instead, she stayed very loyally. Zheng Yuan was deeply moved by this. Lu Yi laughed and said disapprovingly, Master Wan, you usually boast of being resourceful. I didn't expect that you would be so smart this time. Didn't you see that when Zheng Yuan's disciple heard Zheng Yuan's order to escape, she subconsciously made a movement to escape? But she soon stopped, which means that she quickly understood Zheng Yuan's intention. At this time, if she was really loyal to Zheng Yuan, she should have escaped immediately and led everyone away. But not only did she not, but she also said something that seemed to be loyal. He, Zheng Yuan's disciple is very scheming. If my guess is right, Zheng Yuan will definitely test his disciple again after he goes back. If he finds that his disciple has the intention of offending him while he is seriously injured, he will definitely kill her. But if his disciple can bear it, then Zheng Yuan will definitely be in big trouble. Wang Zhenyuan was quite moved when he heard this. He said, Lu Yi, you are indeed an old fox. You are so meticulous and insightful. You seem to have seen everything with your own eyes. But why do you say that if Zheng Yuan's disciple can bear it, then Zheng Yuan will definitely be in big trouble? Lu Yi snorted and said, this woman is scheming. The look of enduring humiliation in her eyes is exactly the same as Yan Fang's incarnation of Mo Ashi. I have lived with Yan Fang for 9 years. How can I not see it? Zheng Yuan's disciple is so tolerant, so she must have a big plan. As long as she can bear it, Zheng Yuan will definitely not be on guard against her. And when a man is no longer on guard against a beautiful woman who is closest to him, that's when he will be in the most danger. Only then did Wang Zhenyuan's anger turn into joy. He laughed and said, amazing, really amazing. I hope it's as you said. If the immortal pen and the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade fall into the hands of this woman, then I will be much more relieved. Lu Yi smiled slightly and said, that's not necessarily true. I can see that this woman has excellent aptitude and is a good material for cultivation. If Zheng Yuan passes on his skills to her, with her forbearance, she may be much more terrifying than Zheng Yuan. Wang Zhenyuan snorted and said with a sneer, Zheng Yuan is a smiling tiger who hides a knife in his smile. He has always been selfish. If he would do such a thing, it would be more likely to squeeze out his disciple's Zhenqi. Then, he said impatiently, let's not talk about them. Let's talk about Yan Fang. This woman always spoils our plans. What should we do? Lu Yi smiled confidently and said, didn't Li Jiandong catch up with her? With his cultivation, even if Yan Fang escapes to the ends of the earth, how can she escape from his hands? Wang Zhenyuan sighed and said, that had better be the case. Otherwise, if this crazy woman keeps pestering us, it will be really bad. Lu Ye's eyes suddenly became very profound. He looked deeply at the dark sky and said slowly, don't worry, the sky is about to change. While Lu Yi and Wang Zhenyuan were talking in private, Chris, John, and Alba were listening to the Dongwu Pingtan on the yacht on the moat of Dongwu City while enjoying the beautiful night view of Dongwu City. Alba leaned against the antique bamboo railing, sighed softly, and said, what a beautiful night view. I suffered a lot during the day and took a sightseeing boat at night. I didn't come to China in vain. John was also enjoying the bright night view of Dongwu City with great interest. He suddenly said in surprise, Alba, do you want to go back? Alba looked at John strangely. Do you still want to stay here? Haven't you been humiliated enough by that Chinese man? John's face immediately drooped and he muttered, maybe it's really so strict to be a disciple in China. I think. I shouldn't give up like this. Zhou Qin is right. We should be able to withstand the test. Moreover, Master has such great ability. If he casually passed it on to us, it would be quite unrealistic and naive. Alba laughed. She pressed her forehead and shook her head. You're crazy, John. You still haven't given up. As she said this, she said to Chris, Hey, Chris, what do you think? At this time, Chris was sitting by the window. She was turning her head to look at the beautiful scenery outside the window and the brilliant lights on both sides of the river. The cool night wind was blowing her long golden hair, making her look particularly beautiful. Many people on the cruise ship were secretly looking at her. When Chris heard Alba's words, she turned her head, sighed softly, and said, I also think John is right. We've come all the way here. We can't give up easily. What's more, Zhou Qin is right. How can there be anything in this world that can be successful without going through tests and setbacks? I think this is a tribulation given to us by God. Alba suddenly cried out bitterly, You two lunatics have gone crazy. Forget it, you can go crazy. I don't want to go crazy. I have to go back. Besides, have you really made up your mind to change your nationality? Also, do you have any last words that you want me to bring back to your family? Chapter 5:15. The young spirits of Yan Fang and Li Yundong were fleeing, while the other was chasing. One was fleeing like a gust of wind, and the other was chasing like a bone needle, closely following her. No matter how hard Yan Fang's young spirit tried to escape, she couldn't escape Li Yundong's pursuit. She wanted to turn into countless avatars and escape in all directions, but just as she was about to move, Li Yundong flicked the burning thumb pot with his finger. Go to the net. Yan Fang was shocked. She knew that the burning thumb pot specialized in absorbing spiritual qi. The reason why it didn't absorb her spiritual qi now was that her yang spirit qi was huge and as condensed as steel, so the burning thumb pot couldn't absorb it. But if her yang spirit scattered into thousands of avatars, it would be equivalent to breaking a piece of ice into countless pieces, and the burning thumb pot could easily absorb all of her yang spirit avatars. Yan Fang didn't dare to split herself. She wanted to escape to the downtown area, but she was soon blocked by Li Yundong. She wanted to escape into the distance, but she couldn't escape from Li Yundong's grasp. In despair, she suddenly had an idea and got into a yacht. This time, Li Yundong didn't stop her and followed her in. Yan Fang sat in her seat, motionless. She sneered and said in a low voice, Li Yundong, do you want to fight here? As soon as Li Yundong sat down, he found that Chris, John, and Alba were staring at him with their mouths agape. He was slightly stunned, but he quickly withdrew his gaze, as if he hadn't seen them. He said, Yan Fang, you can't escape. Just surrender. Hand over Ao Wushuang and swear that you will never go against the Fox Zen school again. For Zi Yuan's sake, I will let you live. Yan Fang sneered and said, You're dreaming. Li Yundong sighed and shook his head slightly. You really don't repent. Then don't blame me for being ruthless. Yan Fang sneered and said, I'd like to see how you will do it with so many people here. Li Yundong smiled slightly. He didn't move, but his fingers pinched a magic incantation under the table. Suddenly, colorful balls exploded in the sky one after another. They were dazzling and brilliant, like thousands of flowers blooming in the east wind at night. Except for Chris and the others who happened to see Li Yundong and Yan Fang appear on the ship, the rest of the tourists on the ship didn't notice them at all. Suddenly, they saw the fireworks outside and the colorful meteors all over the sky. They immediately stood up in amazement and walked to the deck of the yacht, pointing at the sky and laughing. For a moment, the cabin of the yacht was almost empty, leaving only Li Yundong and Yan Fang looking at each other coldly, and Chris, John, and Alba staring at them with wide eyes. The first song of Ambush on 10 Sides, Camp, suddenly showed the tense and intense atmosphere of the first song of Ambush on 10 Sides. John and Chris, who had been watching from the side, couldn't help but become nervous along with the music. Only Alba sneered and said in a low voice, "Chris, are you crazy? How could you pay for this chauvinistic man? You're a disgrace to us feminists." Chris didn't look at her. She just whispered, "Why do I feel that there's something wrong with the two of them?" John also glared at Alba and said, "Alba, you don't want to take him as your teacher, but I do." "Shut up." Alba sneered and said, "Oh, John, I think before you change your nationality, you'd better think of a nice Chinese name for yourself first. I have a few good names to recommend to you. It just so happens that I've learned some Chinese in the past 2 days. What do you think, surname Ma and name me Flatterer?" John suddenly became furious and turned his head to quarrel with Alba, but Chris quickly kicked him under the table and said, "John, shut up." John glared at Alba fiercely and stopped looking at her angrily. Alba made a face at John and muttered in a low voice, "You're crazy. You have to change your nationality to take him as your teacher. If it were me, I would." As soon as she finished speaking, Li Yundong suddenly sighed and said to Yen Fong, "I'm sorry." After that, he turned his hand and grabbed Yen Fong. Yen Fong's face changed, and her body immediately changed from Yang spirit to Yin spirit. Her whole body seemed to pass through the chair behind her, trying to escape in an instant. But Li Yundong snorted coldly and moved like a shadow. In the blink of an eye, he appeared behind Yen Fong and slapped her head with his palm. His movements were so fast that it was as if Yen Fong had bumped into his palm. Yen Fong also saw the opportunity very quickly. Her body instantly shrank to the size of a palm. She abruptly turned and fled out of the window. Li Yundong smiled coldly. He pointed his finger at the window and saw that the window, which was made of vines, made a slight sound. Many small vines grew out and weaved a small net. The net was surrounded by blue light, like a vast net, waiting for Yen Fong to get into it. Yen Fong immediately turned her head and rushed to another window. Li Yunyang did the same thing and used the wood magic at will. Soon, small vines grew out of the windows of the ship and quickly weaved into a small net. Yen Fong had nowhere to go, so she immediately showed her original form. She gritted her teeth and rushed toward Li Yundong. Her ferocious eyes seemed to say, "If you don't let me live, you won't live either." Yen Fong was fierce, and her fingers were like hooks. However, Li Yundong slightly tilted his body and dodged her grasp. He put one hand on her wrist and pulled her back to her original position with a little force. Li Yundong whispered, "Sit down." Yen Fong only felt a huge force pushing her. Li Yundong snorted. He had been fooled once, so how could he be fooled again? Without saying a word, he flicked his finger again. Yen Fong only heard the tinkling of the burning thumb pot, which was like a soul-stirring bell, pulling her into the abyss again and again. Yen Fong was horrified and didn't dare to play any more tricks. She said sternly, "Li Yundong, do you want to save Ao Wushuang or catch me?" After that, Yen Fong immediately threw out the hidden emperor's clock. Li Yundong suddenly saw the emperor's clock being thrown by Yen Fong into the sky in an instant, drawing a purple belt of light. Yen Fong's avatars fled in all directions as if they had gone crazy. Li Yundong snorted coldly and flicked the burning thumb pot again. This time, the burning thumb pot pulled many of Yen Fong's doppelgangers to the front. As soon as these doppelgangers got within 30 feet of the burning thumb pot, they immediately turned into blue light and quickly flew into the burning thumb pot. As for Li Yundong himself, he instantly turned into a blue light and chased after the emperor's clock. Although Li Yundong's actions were different, his speed was so fast that it seemed that he had done it at the same time. Nearly half of Yen Fang's avatars were pulled over by the burning thumb pot, and then they were quickly refined by it. The yang spirit was equivalent to the second body of a cultivator. If half of the body was swallowed at once, the injury would be unimaginable for a cultivator. Yen Fang immediately let out a shrill scream. Her pain was no less than that of being dismembered, and her cultivation was greatly reduced. Yen Fang's angry roar came from afar. No one could hear what she was roaring, but her voice disappeared into the dark night, like a wild wolf that had escaped back into the deep mountains and wild forests, without a trace. Li Yundong's figure instantly returned to where he was. He held the burning thumb pot in one hand and the emperor's clock in the other. His eyes flickered as he looked in the direction where Yen Fang had gone. He deeply felt Yen Fang's resentment and anger. At the last moment, Yen Fang not only threw out the emperor's clock in an attempt to lure the tiger away from the mountain, but at the same time, she also cut off her wrist. She would rather let Li Yundong refine a large number of avatars than be caught by him. After a wild wolf was caught, in order to escape, it would even bite off its own foot. For cultivators, their power and cultivation were more important than their reputation. In order to escape, Yen Fang would rather lose half of her power. What great determination and courage did she need? I let her escape again. What a terrible opponent. After standing still in the air, Li Yundong snorted coldly to himself. Soon, his body turned into a beam of green light and flew back in the direction of Su Chan and the others. Chapter 5:17. When Li Yundong returned to the small building, he found that the cultivators of various sects had already left, such as the Qingqing sect, the Qingwei sect, and the Jinshan sect. In particular, most of the cultivators of some small cultivation sects had left. Only the big sects, such as the Zhengyi school, the Chuanzhen dragon sect, and the Gazao sect, still had some people left. Go to the internet. At this time, Zi Yuan and the others had also recovered from the immortal fall. Seeing Li Yundong return, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, as well as Chao Yi and the little foxes, who were taking care of Lu Yuehong, immediately stood up to greet him. Su Chan and the little foxes looked at Li Yundong with wide eyes and asked with concern, "Did you catch her?" Li Yundong shook his head, and the little foxes suddenly sighed. Chao Yi gritted her teeth and said, "I can't believe we let this guy run away again." Zi Yuan looked worried. Second Sherbua is stubborn and can endure. If she runs away, I really don't know when she will appear again. Li Yundong also sighed and said, at the last moment, Yen Fang would rather lose half of her strength and run away. Although she is an enemy, I still admire her very much. When Lu Yuehong, who was seriously injured, heard that Yen Fang had lost half of her strength, she couldn't help but be happy and said, "Leader, since Yen Fang has been seriously injured, I think she won't make things difficult for us in a short time. Is that so?" As she spoke hurriedly, her injuries were immediately affected, and she coughed violently again. Chao Yi couldn't help complaining to her, "Shiji, you can only be a thief for 1,000 days. How can you guard against thieves for 1,000 days? Just rest and recuperate." Lu Yuehong forced a smile and said, "Shiji, I just want to take advantage of this period of time to search for Yen Fang's whereabouts once and for all." Hearing Lu Yuehong call Chao Yi Shiji, Li Yundong couldn't help asking, "Sherbua Lu Yuehong, Sherbua Chao Yi is only ranked 6th, not the youngest. Below her are Yi Yu and Ao Wushuang. In principle, Ao Wushuang is the youngest, so she should be called Shiji. Why do you call Sherbua Chao Yi Shiji?" Lu Yuehong sighed and said bitterly, "Leader, Yi Yu is dead and Ao Wushuang is also in danger. Now in our Fox Zen school, Chao Yi is the youngest. If I don't call her junior sister, who else should I call?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said to Chao Yi Shibua, I'm afraid you won't be able to be the little shimmy. His words stunned everyone in the Fox Zen school. Su Chan was the most quick-witted. She suddenly looked ecstatic, grabbed Li Yundong with both hands, and said loudly, Yundong, did you save my master? Li Yundong patted her soft hand with a smile and nodded. Not bad. Everyone in the Fox Zen school was overjoyed and cheered loudly. Lu Yuehong couldn't help but be overjoyed. Junior sister has been rescued? Where? Where is she? I'm going to kill them. At this time, Zhang Tongtian sat down. He sat as steady as a mountain, his eyes slightly narrowed, the corners of his mouth drooped, and he asked in a very dignified manner, Wan Zhenyuan, are you just going to sit back and watch these Japanese people behave atrociously? Qian Tong whispered, these Japanese are too powerful. No one can beat them. Zhang Huashui couldn't help but curse angrily, Bullsh*T, call them over. I can beat them with one finger. Zhang Tongtian asked again, Zhang Cuni couldn't beat them even with the Sanhuang sword in his hand? Qian Tong couldn't help but look at Zhao Ping. Qian Tong said timidly, Shixiangzhang was defeated before he could even pull out his sword. Zhang Huashui couldn't help but curse angrily again, what? It must be some trick played by these Japanese people. Call them over. I'll kill them with one finger. Hearing this, Qian Tong and Zhao Ping smiled bitterly in their hearts and thought, where can we call them? However, Zhang Tongtian suddenly asked, what about the other sects? Qian Tong whispered, the other sections were all defeated. Zhang Huashui suddenly widened his eyes and said angrily, good-for-nothings, a bunch of good-for-nothings. I'm so angry. Zhang Tongtian couldn't help but widen his eyes and say in surprise, they were all defeated? Could it be that these Japanese people humiliated our Chinese cultivation world from head to toe at the Taoist assembly? Qian Tong and Zhao Ping couldn't help but look at each other again. At this time, Qian Tong lowered his head and refused to say anything more. Zhao Ping could only whisper, later, Xinxiu was defeated by Zi Yuan. Zhang Huashui and Zhang Tongtian were both stunned. Zhang Huashui nodded and said, well, I've seen Zi Yuan before. She's not bad. She's really good. Zhang Tongtian also nodded slightly. He stroked his beard and said, fortunately, our Chinese cultivation world didn't lose face in front of the Japanese. Zi Yuan did a good job. She deserves to be Wang Yuanshan's disciple. Unexpectedly, Zhao Ping whispered again, but later, Zi Yuan was defeated by their witch, Tachibana Wakako. Zhang Huashui and Zhang Tongtian were shocked. What? Zhang Huashui's eyes widened like copper bells. Then what happened later? Zhao Ping glanced at Qian Tong, as if he was very reluctant to say what he was going to say next. However, Qian Tong seemed to not see him. He lowered his head, like a mute gourd with its mouth cut. Zhang Huashui had a hot temper. When he saw this, he slapped his thigh and said, you two sons of bitches want me to die of anxiety? Tell me, Zhao Ping. Zhao Ping had no choice but to say, later, Tachibana Wakako was defeated by Li Yundong. Li Yundong? Zhang Huashui was stunned. It was as if he had heard the news that the Martians had attacked the Earth. He opened his mouth and said, "The leader of the Fox Zen school?" Why did her Shibua and Shiji have to make things difficult for Li Yundong? Zhang Lufang blinked her eyes and thought to herself, Amateus, I heard that Zhang Huashui of the Qingqing sect is known as the fierce Zhang Fei of the cultivation world. If he makes trouble for Li Yundong, there will be a good show to watch. Chapter 523. Su Chan looked at Ao Wushuang eagerly and said in a low voice, Master, if I don't go, you have to go, right? That's Yundong's kind intention. Go to the net. 7 K.O.M. Ao Wushuang said angrily, No, I won't go, and you can't go either. Do you think I don't know what you're up to? You're just. But before she could finish her words, she heard Li Yundong shouting at her from outside the door, Qianbei Ao Wushuang, Zi Yuan has picked out a dress for you. Do you think it fits? After hearing this, Su Chan rolled her eyes and said tentatively, Master, you don't want Yundong's, but you can't refuse Sister Zi Yuan's, can you? You have to give her face, don't you? Ao Wushuang was exasperated. No, I don't want any of them. I don't want any of them. As soon as she finished speaking, she heard Lu Yuehong knocking on the door and complaining, Shimmy, what are you doing? What's so important? Didn't I hear that you were going to leave a few minutes ago? You don't even want to accept the kindness of the leader and Jinren Zi Yuan. It's not right, is it? Ao Wushuang was helpless. She glared at Su Chan fiercely, rushed to the door, opened it, and rushed to Li Yundong like a gust of wind. She snatched the bag from his hand and said through gritted teeth, Thank you. Then she rushed back like a gust of wind. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan were stunned and looked at each other. Li Yundong stared blankly and said, What's wrong with her? Who offended her? Zi Yuan also stuttered and said, That's my thing. Your thing is in my hands. Ao Wushuang returned to the room with a cold face, only to see the little girl sitting on the bed and meditating, as if she had already entered a trance. Ao Wushuang was stunned and couldn't help nodding. She thought to herself, she's worth teaching. She wanted to test Su Chan, so she shook the bag in her hand and said, Chaner, do you want to know what's inside? But Su Chan was still motionless like a stone. Ao Wushuang was stunned. She knew her disciple's character very well, and she knew that Su Chan would never be unresponsive. Her heart couldn't help but move, and then she became furious. She pointed at Su Chan on the bed. Sure enough, Su Chan's body suddenly disappeared with a whoosh, leaving only a Liujiayin spirit talisman floating slowly in the air. Ao Wushuang was furious. Evil disciple, how dare you fight with me? She suddenly turned around and wanted to rush out and pull Su Chan back, but then she thought, you can't force a melon to be sweet. Su Chan is so playful and lively. Cultivation is really a headache. What would happen if this went on? Thinking of this, Ao Wushuang couldn't help but feel a headache. An idea suddenly flashed through her mind, and she thought to herself, do I have to use this method? Su Chan used the trick of a cicada escaping from its shell and slipped outside. But not long after she slipped out, she regretted it. When she saw clearly what Li Yundong had bought for her, she sneaked back. As soon as she entered the door, she saw Ao Wushuang sitting cross-legged on the spot, motionless, like a clay bodhisattva. When Su Chan saw her Liujiayin spirit talisman lying quietly in the same place, she knew that her trick had been seen through. Her heart skipped a beat. Just as she was about to rush over and use her method of acting coquettishly to get away with it, she heard Ao Wushuang sigh. Ao Wushuang opened her eyes, which were full of disappointment. She said to Su Chan with a look of exasperation, "Chaner, do you still want to continue on the path of cultivation? Do you really want to see yourself become a burden to Li Yundong?" Su Chan knew that she was in the wrong. She lowered her head, rubbed the corner of her clothes, and whispered, "No, I don't want to." Ao Wushuang sighed and said, "As Li Yundong's partner, you don't want to make progress in cultivation. Have you ever thought that if you meet an enemy in the future and they attack you? If you are caught, even if Li Yundong has great ability, he can only be captured and killed." Speaking of this, Ao Wushuang's eyes suddenly turned red. She choked and said, "Do you know how Wang Yuanshan was caught in the end? At that time, he was the youngest Jinshan master in the world, and everyone said that he would be the best in the world in the future. But it was because of me, because my cultivation was too low, that I was finally caught by the people of Zhengyi School, and then Zhengyi School used me to lead Wang Yuanshan into a trap. In the end, I had to live alone for the rest of my life, and he." Speaking of this, Ao Wushuang couldn't help but burst into tears. Only then did Su Chan know why her master had been forcing her to cultivate. She also seemed to feel the same way and felt sad in her heart. She couldn't help but reach out to hold Ao Wushuang's hand, tears streaming down her face. Ao Wushuang sighed and said, "Chaner, do you know why I only favored you in the Fox Zen school? It's because you are the most similar to me at that time. We are both playful and naive. I just don't want you to follow my old path and follow in the footsteps of Wang Yuanshan and me." Su Chan couldn't help crying. She threw herself into Ao Wushuang's arms and cried, "I'm sorry, master. It's my fault. I will cultivate hard in the future." Ao Wushuang grabbed Su Chan's hand and said, "If you want to cultivate, you have to go back to the mountain with me and stay away from the secular world. Only in this way can you calm down and cultivate in peace. Can you do that?" When Su Chan heard this, she immediately stopped crying. Her eyes widened and she thought to herself, "Am I going to be separated from Yundong? How can I do this? How can I live without Yundong?" Su Chan widened her eyes and looked at Ao Wushuang with tears in her eyes. She cried, "Master, I can't do without Yundong. Without him, I feel empty in my heart, as if I have lost my soul. If that happens, I will definitely not be able to cultivate well." Ao Wushuang looked at Su Chan fixedly. After a long time, she sighed and shook her head, saying, "It's a sin, it's really a sin. I knew it would be like this. But you can't go on like this. When you are by his side, you are playful and have no mood to cultivate. When you leave him, you are worried and can't cultivate either. What should we do?" Su Chan was stunned and lowered her head. She hesitated for a long time before slowly raising her head and saying with a red face, "As long as Yundong cultivates to the Jinshan phase, we can." Su Chan stammered and stammered. Ao Wushuang couldn't help but snort and said, "Then we can have dual cultivation, right?" Su Chan's cheeks suddenly turned red. She snorted softly like a mosquito and nodded slightly. "Yes." Ao Wushuang couldn't help sighing and said, "Jinshan, hey, Jinshan. There are hundreds of thousands of cultivators in the world, but how many of them are in the Jinshan phase? I can count them with both hands. He has only cultivated for more than half a year. When do you expect him to cultivate to the Jinshan phase?" Su Chan couldn't help but raise her head boldly and say to Ao Wushuang, but didn't Wang Yuanshan also cultivate to the Jinshan phase at a young age? Ao Wushuang sneered and said, Wang Yuanshan began cultivating in his mother's womb. Before he was born, he was given elixirs. At the age of 14, his yang spirit reached the advanced level, and it took him until he was 30 years old to cultivate to the Jinshan phase. Do you know how many elixirs he took in the past 16 years? Just the dregs of the medicine can be piled up to form a Mount Tianlong. If it weren't for his great perseverance and wisdom, he wouldn't have been able to cultivate even if he had 2 medicine mountains. Moreover, do you think it's so easy to cultivate to the Jinshan phase? Since ancient times, in order to cultivate to the Jinshan phase, one must have extraordinary cultivation talent, coupled with a large number of elixirs. Only then can one succeed. If one's talent is slightly inferior, no matter how many elixirs there are, it will be useless, unless there is a Dun Jin Dan. Humph, if a fool takes the Dun Jin Dan, he can also reach the Jinshan phase. However, is it so easy to refine the Dun Jin Dan? If Li Yundong wants to cultivate to the Jinshan phase, he either has to pile up elixirs or take the Dun Jin Dan. In order to reach the Jinshan phase, Wang Yuanshan almost lost the family property of the Linggong sect. If it weren't for Zhang Tianshi, the leader of the Zhengyi school, who saw that he was young and promising and had been supporting him, and his shimi worked hard to raise funds, how could he have persisted? Hearing this, Su Chan was depressed. Then what should I do? Do I really have to get used to being a burden after the age of 20? No matter how hard you work, someone will eventually talk about it. Moreover, the blow and trauma that the mystical silver fox caused to the entire cultivation world was too serious. You can't imagine it at all. If the mystical silver fox is really resurrected, the whole cultivation world will regard you as a public enemy. At that time, no matter whether you are a good person or not, no matter what great good deeds you have done in the past, they will attack you crazily until you, the leader of the Fox Zen school, are destroyed and the mystical silver fox is sealed again. Li Yundong also turned around. He thought for a while and said, I can understand why they are hostile to the Fox Zen school, but what I don't understand is why the whole cultivation world is so hostile and vigilant towards the mystical silver fox. What did she do before? Zi Yuan hesitated for a moment, her eyes full of hesitation. She thought for a moment, sighed and said, forget it. You should have known these things. Zi Yuan stroked her hair and said, you have stayed in the spirit space for tens of thousands of years and read all kinds of ancient books, but have you found any records about the mystical silver fox? Li Yundong was also surprised and said, if you didn't mention it, I wouldn't have noticed it. Now that you mention it, I remember that in the ancient books in the spirit space, there is no mention of the mystical silver fox. Most of them are slanderous to the Fox Zen school. There is only a slight mention of the founder of the Fox Zen school, the Rock Fox. Zi Yuan nodded and said, that's right. After the Rock Fox founded the Fox Zen school, he defeated many good cultivators with a psychic fan of 7 treasures. Later, these cultivators felt deeply humiliated by being defeated by the fox spirit and began to ruin the reputation of the Fox Zen school everywhere. The next 2 generations of sect leaders were also disappointing, and they made the Fox Zen school a mess. But at this time, the Fox Zen school only had a bad reputation and was a little notorious. It was not a demon that everyone would talk about. Li Yundong said, until the mystical silver fox appeared. Zi Yuan nodded slightly. Yes. The mystical silver fox was the 4th generation leader of the Fox Zen school. When she first took over, the whole Fox Zen school was in a mess. Moreover, ever since the Fox Zen school's elder rock had immortalized, the majority of the Fox Zen school's members had been female. Most of the Fox Zen school's Buddhist magic was Buddhist magic, and most female cultivators could not learn the masculine and powerful Buddhist magic. Therefore, after 2 generations, the Buddhist magic of the Fox Zen school had almost been lost. In order to change this situation, the mystical silver fox secretly disguised herself as a nun and sneaked into Mount Wutai to learn Buddhist magic. Li Yundong asked, did she learn it secretly? After the battle between the Zhengyi school and the Maoshan sect, they began to make peace. The 2 major Taoist sects issued a kill order to the mystical silver fox at the same time. From then on, most of the Taoists in the world would kill the people of the Fox Zen school when they saw them. In order to save her life and become stronger, the mystical silver fox turned into an old woman and sneaked into the Qingzhou sect of the Qingzhou Mountain Pavilion. She stole the supreme elixir of Taoism, the Diyuan Jindan and the 3 elixir code. From then on, she gathered the Buddhist Dharma and Taoist magic arts in one body and became a master of both Buddhism and Taoism. After the mystical silver fox achieved great success in cultivation, she came to Mount Wutai and challenged Zen Master Huifa in public as she wished. Zen Master Huifa's spiritual power was greatly reduced because his Tongyang body was broken. He was defeated in the battle. After humiliating him, the mystical silver fox left. 3 days later, Zen Master Huifa died of serious injuries. His successor disciple, Wu Neng, declared that the mystical silver fox was a great enemy of Buddhism and began to discredit the mystical silver fox and her sect on various occasions. Therefore, over time, Fox Zen was derided as Wild Fox Zen by the world. After the mystical silver fox reached the peak of Buddhism and Taoism, she was still unwilling to give up. In order to become stronger, at this time, she finally did something that almost caused the cultivation world to fall into a disaster. Li Yundong's expression was awe-inspiring when he heard this. He quickly asked, "What is it?" Just as Zi Yuan was about to speak, the kitchen door was suddenly pulled open. Su Chan said in surprise at the door, "Yundong, there are guests at home." Li Yundong was stunned. "Who's here?" Su Chan said with a strange expression, "Wan Zhenyuan." Li Yundong and Zi Yuan looked at each other and asked, "What is he doing here?" 8. Yeah. Baidu search. To read the latest chapter, please visit 8 Degrees Bar Updates fastest. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.